Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions, specifically when Dan Campbell arrived there. Alright, I have a lot to say, so let's go ahead, let's get it out of the way. The rise of the Detroit Lions, from rebuild to contender. What the fuck? Year that was 2020, the Detroit Lions were 5-11 under Matt Patricia and GM Bob Quinn. Matt Patricia. I really want to take those pencils he keeps in his ears and put an eraser on it and go erase his whole entire playbook because his play calling sucks. 12-year vet Matthew Stafford was the quarterback for the Detroit Lions. Here's where the rebuild begins. All right, so Detroit, early 2021, they fire Matt Patricia, the head coach. They fire Bob Quinn, the GM. Time for a full rebuild. In comes Brad Holmes, former college expert scout for the Los Angeles Rams, who had helps in drafting players like Jared Goff, Aaron Donald, Cooper Kupp. The list goes on and on. The guy knew how to build a team. Quickly as a new Lions GM, one of his first major moves was to hire the new head coach, that being Dan Campbell. Oh my goodness. When Dan Campbell was first hired on as the Detroit Lions head coach, like many others, including myself, I was very skeptical and worried. I mean, the guy was coming off with sound bites like this.
Down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off. All right?
See from the introductory press conferences sometimes we're like, uh-oh.
First of all, a legitimate argument could have been made. He should have been fined on the spot in this press conference. I mean, you're talking about biting kneecaps and stuff like that.
I love the metaphor of biting off another team's kneecaps, or even maybe wanting to walk an actual line on the field. But he hadn't even coached his first football game with the Lions yet. Going into the 2021 season, they were going to have to make their first move, specifically regarding the quarterback position. Matthew Stafford was over it. Like many Lions fans and players, he saw that there was no way to get a championship anytime soon. 12-year vet. I mean, with all the injuries he had, he might as well be close to a 20-year vet at that point. He was ready to get his Super Bowl, and he knew the Lions weren't going to be the answer anytime soon. So, the Detroit Lions traded Matthew Stafford to the Los Angeles Rams, and in return, they received Jared Goff, who new GM Brad Holmes had a really good relationship with. We're going to get more into that later. Going into the 2021 draft, the Lions did make a couple, important pieces to a larger puzzle.
It's all just pieces of a much larger puzzle.
First round pick, 7th overall, Penei Sewell. Offensive tackle, primarily right tackle. Round 4, pick 112, Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver from USC. Keep that in mind. Let's talk a little bit. Who the fuck is Dan Campbell? Former tight end of the NFL, had a few stints with a few different teams, one of them actually being the Detroit Lions. After his tenure of playing, he actually went to the coaching side, first starting off with the Miami Dolphins as a tight end coach. Then in 2015, he actually got his little taste of what being a head coach was about. Miami hired him as the interim head coach, waiting for Chad Gase to come along. What a smart move that was. After a stint with the Dolphins, Campbell ended up with the New Orleans Saints as a tight end and assistant head coach with Sean Payton. Well regarded by all of his players, known for his intense personality and motivational speeches, Dan Campbell was a huge favorite amongst many players. Going into the 2021 season, not a lot was expected of the Lions, but we were all very curious, of course. See what biting off kneecaps looks like. Well, very early on, it wasn't looking very good. They started off 0-2, played the Baltimore Ravens, where Justin Tucker ended up making the longest field goal in NFL history of 66 yards. Boy, what times it was for him back then. Better times for Justin Tucker. Going into week 10, they were 0-8, playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. And before Dan Campbell even recorded his first win as the Detroit Lions head coach, they tied a game. Dan Campbell's Detroit Lions tied the Steelers before they even recorded their first win. Not looking very good. Wasn't until week 13 where they played the subpar average Minnesota Vikings led by Kirk Cousins. Huge, not big, so fan of his. They were actually able to pull out a last-second touchdown win to beat the Minnesota Vikings. And boy, was that memorable and big. It was basically like their Super Bowl, you could say. 2021 was the first season we saw 17 games played by each team. The Lions finished 3-13-1.
It does not look good.
A little bit of optimism going into 2022. All right. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Jared Goff specifically. He played for the LA Rams from 2016 through 2020 under Sean McVay, led them to a couple playoff appearances and even a Super Bowl appearance. Jared Goff's final season in 2020 was a very interesting one. I think it's more of a testament to what Sean McVay actually thought of him. See, Jared Goff had taken the Rams to the playoffs a couple times, and like I mentioned, even took them to the Super Bowl. Jared Goff's final season 2020, the last couple weeks he suffered a broken thumb. Actually had to have a couple screws put in it. Incidentally, he was benched in their first playoff game. Going into the 2020 playoff season, the Rams had their first game in Seattle against the Seahawks. Now, keep in mind, 2020, no crowds. No fans in the stands. LA Rams traveled to Seattle to play the Seahawks. Jared Goff, though, not the starting quarterback. Instead, we get a man named John Woodford. And to John Woodford's credit, he was actually killing it. The Rams were kicking ass and taking names in that playoff game. It was pretty incredible to watch, especially if you knew John Woodford just a few weeks prior was not playing in the NFL. He was like filing people's taxes or selling insurance or some shit. Unfortunately, though, early on that game, John Woodford did get injured in the neck, had to be taken to the hospital. Comes on in Jared Goff and wins the football game with a broken thumb that's got a couple screws. Mighty impressive. Following week, the Rams had to go play one of the best teams in football that year. The Green Bay Packers taking on MVP Aaron Rodgers at the 10. Unfortunately, you can guess, the Rams did not win that game. They were eliminated from the playoffs. Now, within the subsequent weeks soon after, Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford took a nice little trip down to Mexico. I'm assuming not planned together. Somehow they both met up in Mexico on vacation and hit it off really well. Sean McVay believed Matthew Stafford was the missing piece to them winning the Super Bowl. He was not wrong. Keep in mind, the new GM for the Detroit Lions is now Brad Holmes, former college scout expert for the LA Rams, who happened to draft Jared Goff. A trade was easily done, but it definitely left a bitter taste in Jared Goff's mouth, and I think for a lot of Rams fans as well too, to see how he went. That bitter taste soon turned into sweet though, as the LA Rams the following year went on to win the Super Bowl against the Cincinnati Bengals in their own stadium, which was pretty epic to watch. Not to mention one of the best halftime show performances.
Playing Humble by Kendrick Lamar.
Now, that 3-13-1 season wasn't all for nothing. They were able to draft first round, pick number 2, Aiden Hutchinson, defensive end from Michigan. Just a game wrecker and a game changer, you could say. Round 3, pick number 9-7, Kirby Joseph, safety from Illinois. Both Hutchinson and Joseph have solidified themselves on the Detroit Lions defense. Both really amazing picks. And mind you, just the year prior, they'd also made a couple good picks as well too. Now, very similar to how 2021 season was started, it's kind of how 2022 started as well. They were 1-6, not looking very good.
This doesn't look very good. Oh, this doesn't look very good at all.
What were the Lions going to pull off? Well, they were kind of beating to the same drum from the year prior. Many were calling for Dan Campbell's job at that point. It was time to move on. This little bite off the kneecaps failed experiment wasn't working out anymore. But then they had a bit of a turnaround, finishing the season 8-2, including the final game of the season going against the Green Bay Packers. Really felt like a playoff game, almost Super Bowl-like. The Packers were playing to win. The Lions were nowhere near shot of getting the playoffs at this point. They wanted to make sure that if they weren't going, the Packers weren't going either. Lambeau Field was a frozen tundra early January, and the Lions knocked off the Packers in incredible fashion, showcasing their amazing offensive talents behind offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. They were able to beat the Packers 20-16 in what would actually subsequently be Aaron Rodgers' final game as a Green Bay Packer. It's a good way to go out. Finishing the 2022 season on a 9-8 record was a huge improvement from the 3-13-1 record from the year prior. Going into 2023, the Lions had so much optimism and a lot to look forward to. That year, entering the draft class, they made a couple notable picks as well. Again, we're seeing a trend here. Thank you, Mr. Brad Holmes. Round 1, pick 18, Jack Campbell, linebacker, Iowa. Round 2, pick number 34, Sam Laporta, tight end, Iowa. Again, thank you, LA. Round 2, pick number 45, Brian Branch, defensive back, Alabama. These 4 players were going to be a crucial part going into the 2023 season for the Detroit Lions. No more perennial underdogs, you could say. Building off the momentum from the previous year, the team made significant strides. The 2023 season was completely different for the Lions. Their offense was at times unstoppable. Their defense had truly come together, finishing the season with a 12-5 record, the best since the early 90s. Jahmyr Gibbs proved to be an amazing running back. Since 1993, the Lions were going to host their first playoff game, nonetheless against the Los Angeles Rams, aka Matthew Stafford, who just 2 years prior is removed from winning a Super Bowl. In one of the most entertaining playoff games to ever watch, the Detroit Lions pulled off the upset and beat the LA Rams in their home stadium. The crowd was electrifying. That stadium was rocking. You could hear it all the way from coast to coast. Following week in the divisional round, the Lions got to host the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, another nail-biting game. Really entertaining to watch. Unfortunately, though, their 2023 season came to an end in the conference championship game, playing the stunning San Francisco 49ers. And while the game was incredible, they did lose 34-31, giving hope, though, for the 2024 season that was to come. All expectations were high at this point for the Detroit Lions. Going into their 4th year under Dan Campbell, Super Bowl was the goal. Going into week 6, the Lions were 3-1. Just coming off a bye. They entered Dallas Cowboy Stadium and ripped them apart. It was great. If you look at Jerry Jones' face during that game, it was very pleasant to watch. Fortunately, this victory did turn into a tragedy. Aiden Hutchinson would break his leg, his fibia, and would be out the remainder of the season. Now, for me, that was the turning point that I kind of knew the Lions weren't going to make it this year. They weren't going to be Super Bowl contenders. They needed Aiden Hutchinson. They needed that game wrecker, game changer on the field. Not only is he their best player, he makes everyone a much better player. But to little to no avail, they were winning football games. After Aiden Hutchinson broke his leg, the Lions went on an 8-game winning streak. It didn't seem like they needed him. It was almost pretty evident that they were going to win this without Aiden Hutchinson. Going into week 15, the Lions were going to host a very remarkable team, the Buffalo Bills. This was going to be a true testament to how they were playing a team that's also expected to make the Super Bowl. Well, if you look at the score, it looks like it was a lot closer than it was, 48-42. Watching the game, though, was a much different story. Those 6 points could not have been further apart. The game proved that the Lions were not going to be Super Bowl contenders. They could not keep up with the Buffalo Bills offense. And it was very evident that without Aiden Hutchinson, their defense was just very lackluster. But again, they finished on a high note, winning the last 3 games of the season, ending their record at 15-2, best in franchise history, also being the number 1 seed for the first time, including receiving a bye week. Very impressive. Now, unfortunately, I think we all know how this is going to go. The Commanders came on in and ripped the Lions apart. Just like a few weeks prior with the Buffalo Bills, the Detroit Lions defense could not keep up with the high-ranking offense that the Commanders were. The Commanders were slicing and dicing Detroit. It was kind of painful to watch as a football fan. It was very evident that the season had ran its course and had come to an end. The final score ended up being 45-31, and it felt like it was even more of a blowout than that. After receiving their first round bye and hosting a playoff game, the 2024 season came to a very disappointment end for the Detroit Lions. Now, it's unfortunate that the Lions lost, but it was very foreseen. Without Aiden Hutchinson, there was no way they were going to win that football game. And the Detroit Lions defense was clearly too weak at that point. So now, let's talk about Jared Goff. Is he the guy for the Lions? When you look back on his history, he is a quarterback on paper who has been to the Super Bowl. But let's not forget which Super Bowl that was that he went to. Yeah, he probably shouldn't have been there. Would have been a much different game. Probably a more entertaining one. Now, I don't want to lose all hope on Jared Goff. He is a very talented quarterback, but we have to ask ourselves, is he going to win a Super Bowl? So far, the answer to that question has been
Hell no.
but I still hold out hope. Hell, I've seen Russell Wilson throw 4 interceptions in a playoff game and make it to a Super Bowl. But then again, Jared Goff, can he live in the big moments?
Maybe.
Detroit Lions would have had a much better chance winning that football game if Jared Goff had played like an elite quarterback. Now, is it too early on to say that they don't have a chance of making it to the Super Bowl? Yeah, I think so. I think if we can get a full season with a healthy Aiden Hutchinson, they will be in the Super Bowl next year. But it's the NFL, no fun league. If they are plagued with injuries like they were this past season, I think we're just going to keep seeing a repeat of great regular seasons fall flat in the playoffs.
We're dying to go to the Super Bowl.
So, the question, rebuild or contender? I think 2025 is going to really answer that.
Dude, we've been waiting forever.
If the Detroit Lions do not make it to the Super Bowl next year with a healthy roster, non-injuries, we can chalk this up to as good era, but not good enough.
We're going to win this, right?
Thank you for joining me today. I'll be making more of these videos in the very near future. Please like and subscribe, stick around. I have a lot more content to come.